This is Ernest Adams. Ernest was one of the founder of the IGDA. He was responsible for John Madden football for whatever 8 years.
6
years. One of those numbers. He worked at Bullfrog Productions, a subsidiary of EA. Worked on games such as Genesis: The Hand of God, Dungeon Keeper 3, and now he does the Designer's Notebook and the No-Twinkie for You series. So I'll let Ernest take it from here. So everyone, Ernest Adams.
So yeah, after working for Electronic Arts for 7 years in its headquarters, Redwood City, California, I moved to England and went to work for Bullfrog Productions because they were kind of the most innovative studio on the planet, and I really, really wanted to work for them. And they put me on Dungeon Keeper 3, and I thought, awesome, everybody loves Dungeon Keeper, and then they canceled it. So, which is the fate of anybody who goes into the game industry. Believe me, anybody you talk to in the game industry. They've worked on 3 times as many titles as they have actually shipped, because we kill 2 out of every 3 titles we start. So just so you're aware of that. So I became a freelancer. I couldn't go home for complicated reasons. I had to stay in England, and I couldn't get another job because of my immigration status. So I just set up a business, being a design consultant and sort of a part-time educator and an author. And I've been writing this column, which is called The Designer's Notebook, for the Gamma Sutra Developers Webzine since 1997, which is just about the time that it was set up, actually. Initially monthly, and then kind of every other month, and now it's kind of irregular, actually. But one of the first columns I wrote was just a collection of gripes I had, called Bad Game Designer, No-Twinkie. And it was really popular. And so I wrote another one a couple of years later, and then people started sending me suggestions. And so now, all the Bad Game Designer No-Twinkie columns, which I now do annually in December or thereabouts, actually are things that people have sent in to me. And I have assembled a database of Twinkie denial conditions, which I will give you the URL for at the end of the talk. My heart was really sort of in my mouth the last little while because, of course, it looked like Twinkies were going out of business. Hostess went bankrupt. It was not clear what was going to happen. And but fortunately, the intellectual property, if you can call it that, has been purchased by another company, so it looks like Twinkies may be back. So to start with, because I live in Europe, I teach all over Europe. I'm a guest lecturer, keynote speaker, that kind of thing, all over Europe. I first have to explain what Twinkies are because, of course, they've never heard of them, and they would probably be illegal in France. So, even the birds will not eat this thing. So, they were originally banana flavored, but then the banana flavoring became impossible to get during the Second World War because of rationing, and so they decided to make them not banana flavored, and now we have the modern Twinkie. So, Twinkie denial conditions. Well, I've broken them down into various categories. Bad conceptual design, bad gameplay design, game mechanics, user interface design, bad programming, which is really not a designer thing except when it's sort of a technical design, bad level design, and bad content. And you're going to hear me mention the names of a lot of games that are actually good games. Even really good games can contain errors. So when you hear me rag on a famous game because it's got a Twinkie denial condition, that doesn't mean I hate the game as a whole. It just means that there's this one thing that could be improved. And I need to use good games as examples because, of course, if I use bad games, nobody's ever heard of them, or games that are really obscure. Some of these will be very obscure. I need to warn you. So we'll start with bad conceptual design and sort of what this means. And it's just a bunch of things. One of them is Adolescent Armageddon. Now, this is a pretty old game. This is kind of a, save the galaxy, conquer the world, destroy the universe, that kind of thing. I'm 52 years old, okay? I'm not really into these teenage power fantasies anymore. I actually think the universe can go screw itself. I don't care if it gets saved or not. I think a better Armageddon game, if you're looking for that sort of it's really important game, was Balance of Power. Balance of Power was a game made, and the first edition was 1986, the second edition was 1990. It was a game about geopolitics. The United States versus the Soviet Union in the middle of the Cold War. Each was trying to increase its geopolitical influence and prestige at the expense of the other by manipulating the rest of the world, which is how we do it, right? When I say that in Europe, everybody laughs. But you had to try to help your friends, and you had to try to hurt your enemies, and encourage revolutions and coups in places that were unfriendly to you, in the hopes that the new government would be friendly to you, and all that kind of thing. But of course, the other side, the Russians, always had the opportunity to see what was going on, because now with satellites and stuff, really, there's really almost no such thing as a secret anymore. There's really no such thing as secret military movements. It just doesn't happen. So then they would get in your face and say, we don't think you should do that. And you would say, tough, we're going to do it anyway. And the amount of prestige at stake would go up, and eventually it would go to like DEFCON 3. And if you went too far, there would be a nuclear war. And that was the end of the game. Bang. Just it. And it just put up a black screen that said, you have ignited a nuclear war. We're not going to show you any body parts or explosions or, pictures of vehicles falling apart because we do not reward failure. So, this was about Armageddon in a non-adolescent way, a pretty cool way. Kill monster, take sword, sell sword, buy a new sword, kill a new monster. We're pretty much past grinding in role-playing games, but not absolutely entirely. And the thing about grinding is, you spend all your time haggling with shopkeepers. You go out and you kill stuff, and then you take this huge load of junk that you've collected up, and you take it back to a shopkeeper, and you sell it all, and so on. And that doesn't feel very heroic. And the other thing is that what you really are is actually an itinerant secondhand arms dealer. You just kill stuff and take their weapons, and it's kind of beat up, and you take it back and you get some money for it. And robbing corpses is not exactly, you don't read about Sir Lancelot du Lac, right, or King Arthur, and what they do is go around robbing corpses.
Don't be robbing the houses and the lots.
So, role-playing games kind of need to break this sort of Monty Hall cycle. Actually, most of you are probably too young to understand what that means. But this cycle of just collecting up as much junk as you can, kill 20,000 kobolds and take their crappy little daggers and, go get 3 copper pieces each for them. Conceptual Non Sequiturs. Okay, this is a special favorite of mine. This is anything that a normal human being, that is not a gamer, would say makes no sense, right? In a game that is representational. So I'm going to rant for a minute here. There's this kind of continuum. If you go down to the game store and you look at most of the boxes down there, they're going to say the most amazingly realistic game ever made, right? This is nonsense, because games are not realistic. They can't be, or they would be life. It costs $6 million to train a pilot to fly an F-15. We want a pilot to be able to get into an F-15 and fly it, in the space of 2 minutes. So obviously we have to somewhat simplify the workings of an F-15. So they're all contain simplifications, but we still use this term realism. And I prefer abstract versus representational. So at the abstract end is Pac-Man, right? Pac-Man, okay, you're a round circular dot, and you eat other dots and fruit. And the bananas are worth 500 points. Okay, why? Who cares? Totally abstract. It's a completely arbitrary world, and it has arbitrary rules. The opposite end of this scale is representational, and that's Microsoft Flight Simulator. May it rest in peace. And Microsoft Flight Simulator was correctly simulating the carburetor icing problems of Cessna aircraft back in 1982. Or if you flew your plane upside down because they had gravity-fed fuel, then the engine would cut out, and things like that. So they were really representational, even though the graphics were terrible. So that's the other end. And at that end of the scale, the representational games, they don't really tell you everything you need to know, because they expect you to bring some kind of common sense understanding. So, like, the manual does not say, do not hit the ground, that would be bad. Because gravity is not your friend. They don't bother with that, right? So there's this continuum. And a conceptual non sequitur occurs when you have a representational game in it that contains something really arbitrary, right? So, James Bond, Tomorrow Never Dies. Anybody actually played it? It's getting kind of old now. Yeah, so a fairly small number of you are prepared to admit to that. Very first level, you're James Bond. You're armed only with a pistol. You're trying to sneak into a Soviet airbase. Right outside the Soviet airbase, there is an oil tank. Very first level, right? Now, if you take your pistol and shoot the oil tank, you can blow it up. The Mythbusters have proven you can't do this, by the way, but, you know. So you blow up the oil tank, and what do you find inside? A medical kit. Why? Now, let's think about this. You know? And of course, you know, the thing is, we have these conventions, right? Every gamer knows that you should blow up everything you possibly can blow up, because there might be a medical kit hidden inside, right? But a normal human being that is not a gamer, they might use their brain. You know, they might think, maybe I shouldn't blow up this oil tank, which is right where I am, when I'm only armed with a pistol and I'm outside a Soviet military base, you know, because that would be really stupid. So they don't do it. It would never occur to them that there might be a medical kit inside, right? And you know, there's another convention that normal human beings don't know, and that is that no matter how big an explosion you make, no more than 3 or 4 people will ever come to investigate. You know? So you know, I mean, you know, yes, it's a Soviet air base, and there's 10,000 people on there, and they've got nothing to do, you know. But you blow up an oil tank, and only 3 of them will come look. So what happens is they think this through. They think, okay, you know, I really shouldn't blow that up. So they don't get the medical kit. So they're at a disadvantage. We've just punished them for using their brain, right? That is a conceptual non sequitur. No medical kits hidden inside oil tanks. No half-naked women in role-playing games who strangely drop a full suit of plate armor. It's like, what? Were you having a bad hair day and you didn't want to wear the armor? Aren't you sorry now? You're dead. Or, you know, Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. So I didn't actually buy this game. I played the demo, because that's what I do, because I don't have much time or money. And so I bought Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, point-and-click adventure game, but in a 3D world. And I really love adventure games, and that's all great. And I got into the very first room, and I am such a total loser, I could not figure out my way out of the very first room in the demo. Right? And the reason I could not figure my way out is because it never occurred to me that I should try pushing a 20-ton stone with my bare hands. This is Indiana Jones, it is not Superman. You know, so this is another conceptual non sequitur that had me stuck. You know, and if I were a better hardcore gamer, I would know that, you know, oh, any idiot can push a 20-ton stone. So please don't do this. If you want to sell your game to normal human beings, and that's the thing, you know, this kind of stuff actually discourages people from starting to play. You know, they get into the game, they find themselves stuck at something, and they just say, forget this, I can't get it, and they get out again. Respawning bad guys in realistic games. Again, that you know, continuum between the abstract and the representational. Medal of Honor, Allied Assault. Now, it was okay that things respawned in Doom, because those were demons from hell. And it's okay to have respawning demons from hell, right? They come from hell, that's fine. But respawning Nazis? How does that work? You know, the Nazis
were investigating the occult.
Yeah. They're teleporting in from Berlin. And, you know, I mean, I think respawning, and you know, it's okay in certain limited circumstances, but it's really kind of an arcade game thing. I mean, if you're going to make a realistic game like Medal of Honor, Allied Assault, or something like that, and you're going to try to claim that this, you know, bears some relationship with the real world, then having Nazis appear out of nowhere just is bogus. Totally mute player characters. This one's kind of weird. Now, this is Grand Theft Auto 3, but of course also Gordon Freeman is probably the best example known these days. You get this extremely weird phenomenon where you have a totally mute player character, where you walk around and you can't say anything, and people walk up to you and they're telepathic. Oh, it looks to me like you're looking for a gun. Well, you can find one over here. You know? Or, I think you probably want to do this. How did you know that? So, it's really kind of odd. Bad gameplay design. Extreme rule changes for bosses. Just really extreme. You know, it's like, fighting a boss should be different, but not wildly different. You know, it should require the player to use some lateral thinking, change it up a little, figure stuff out, but it shouldn't be the case that every single thing you have learned to that point is useless. You know, that's not the way it ought to work. So it should build on what the player already knows, and Dead or Alive 3 required a completely different approach. Really extreme lateral thinking required. Now, admittedly, if you're playing the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy game, you kind of know what's coming, right? You know, this kind of really weird, you know, use the lampshade with the bulldozer sort of thing. This is okay once as a joke. It is not okay to have a whole game full of this stuff. You know, other than that, you're really just playing meme tricks on your audience. Never forget that as the game designer, you hold all the cards, right? You are in charge. You are the dungeon master, and the players are the pathetic little peons in your world. And so, you know, because of that, you should not mistreat them. And that's something that I really have a problem with. It's designers who see the player as their opponent, or they see the player as somebody to abuse or to humiliate. No lateral thinking allowed. This is the opposite end of the scale. How come I can kill a stone troll with my axe, but I can't break down a wooden door? You know, I mean, that would seem to be a sort of an obvious thing that you could do with an axe. And actually, now that we have deformable environments, it seems to me like we ought to allow quite a lot of lateral thinking. You know, deformable environments are cool. Now, admittedly, they put a lot of extra work on the designer. You know, I mean, if somebody can simply solve a problem or go through an obstacle by deforming the environment, then, you know, that makes it harder for you as the designer. But there are circumstances when that's a really valuable thing. Grand Theft Auto 3, which I just gave as a bad example for its totally mute player character, allows a lot of lateral thinking. They give you a mission, but how you actually solve it is up to you. And for that matter, so does Manhunt. I'm a little dubious about Manhunt, frankly, from a moral standpoint. But in fact, you're supposed to kill this person, and how you actually go about it is up to you. And there's all kind. You know, you can run over them with a car, and you can poison them, and you can drop a rock on them, and you can shoot them, and so on. So,
a better example would have been Advanced Blood Money.
Haven't played it.
Same concept.
So, you know, letting people resolve problems in whatever way they can think of is a good thing. This is a real oldie. This is actually a text adventure game put out by Infocom. Many combinations and no clues. So you give the player a puzzle, and there's a large number of possible combinations to the correct answer, and you give them no clue whatsoever about which is the correct one. So in Infidel, you explore your way through this buried Egyptian pyramid buried in the sand, and you get to the next to the last room, and you can see the treasure room through a little hole, but you can't get in there, but there's a door that opens, and if you arrange a series of 4 little statues in the correct order, then the door will open and you'll get to the treasure room. But there's no clue as to what is the right order. So the number of possible combinations is 4 factorial, 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, or 24. When you get it wrong, the roof falls in and you die. And you reload from DOS off a floppy. This gets kind of tedious after a while. And there's absolutely no way of knowing. You know, so you die an average of 12 times, basically, before you find out the right solution. So it's a trial and error time waster. You know, and that's just not appropriate. If you're going to set up some kind of a puzzle, you know, the player has to have at least some sort of a clue as to what is the correct solution state. And there need to be hints about how you get there. And a heck of a lot of adventure games do this. You know, they put the player in some sort of weird unlabeled machine with, you know, 8 colored lights and 4 levers, and you got to, you know, pull stuff around. But if you experiment around a little bit, you can see what's going on, and you can figure out which lever does what to which light and so forth. And it doesn't kill you every time you get it wrong. So, you know, don't do this. Totally obscure knowledge required from outside the game. So there was an unreleased game called Haunt that was actually made by what is now an AI professor at Michigan State, you know, that asked the question from Monty Python. And it also asked questions from the very, very old Saturday morning cartoon series of Beanie and Cecil. And if you didn't know the answers, you couldn't play the game, you know. So unless you're doing a trivia game, all the knowledge needed to win the game should be in the game somewhere. So, that's just kind of basic. You don't want to be dogfighting with the Red Baron and your sock with camel and, swooping and diving, and up pops a question that says, please type in the name of John Lennon's wife. It's like, okay, got to open up Wikipedia in the other window. No, don't do that. When you are localizing, beware of cultural differences, too. I mean, when you are moving a game into another culture, you have to be aware of kind of what they know, versus what you know and so forth. I mean, a certain number of things, like I said, require you to use common sense. Gravity is not your friend. But you still kind of have to be sort of aware of what's appropriate in different cultures. Bad game mechanics. Classic one is a deadlock. A deadlock occurs when a process cannot continue because it needs the thing that it makes and there isn't any. It needs as input the thing that it makes as output and there isn't any. Or two processes need each other's outputs and there isn't any. So they sit and they wait for each other forever. In The Settlers 3, you needed a stone cutter to build buildings and to build a stonecutter's hut. And you needed a stonecutter's hut to get stone, and so you could get into a deadlock. And what happened is the game started you off with a certain amount of stone, and once I got so excited about all these cool buildings I could build that I forgot to build a stonecutter's hut. And so I put up all these other buildings, and then I ran out of the initial supply of stone that it gave me, and I was in a deadlock. No stonecutter's hut, can't get any more stone, can't build a stonecutter's hut. And so you need a mechanism for breaking the deadlock. Technically, in Monopoly, in Monopoly you lose if you're out of money. But in principle anyway, you can get into a deadlock if you don't have any money because you can't buy any property, so you can't collect any rent, so you can't get any more money. But you can pass go. And passing go breaks the deadlock and always lets you get some. In The Settlers 3, there was a way to break the deadlock. You could demolish buildings, get half of the stone that went into them back, and that's how I got out of my deadlock in that. I realized, oh my gosh, I've run out of stone. I can't build a stonecutter's hut. I better tear down some of these nice buildings I built, get the stone back, and get out again. So look for these when you're designing the mechanics of a game. Make sure that the player can't ever get into a situation where they're completely stuck with no way forward. They haven't lost. They've just run out of something they need, and there's no way to get any more. And you need to provide a way to get some. Too much randomness. This is Final Fantasy VII. 8. Oh, 8. I'm sorry. Yes, quite right. So I'm playing Final Fantasy VIII, and I've got my people, and I'm watching the tediously long spell animations, and I'm kicking butt of various sorts, and we're getting pretty strong, but every now and then we have to walk through the woods to get somewhere else, and we keep being attacked by these worms. Now, we can beat the worms. There isn't any problem about that, but frankly, it's a pain to fight them because you have the tediously long spell animations. So, what I ended up doing is running away from the worms so I didn't have to fight them. So it was just a time waster. And so, that's one bad thing. Or, if you have really just random bad luck that suddenly makes a game unwinnable. This is not okay for long games. Oh, you played for 40 hours, and then you had bad luck. You're dead. Too bad. It's over, The longer the game, the more important it is that the player be able to win and not just lose through bad luck. So, poker is extremely random, but each game is extremely short. So that's okay. But you want to set it up in such a way that that people in a long game are not just hammered by bad luck. And in the case of Final Fantasy VIII, it was just constant, irritating, random encounters. It added nothing to the plot. It was just bugging me. Incorrect victory checks. This one's slightly weird. So, if you give the player a goal and you say they have to do this thing, then the check in the software to see if they've done it needs to correspond to exactly what you told them. Now, here's what happened with Interstate 76. There was this point where you were in a walled compound, and within the walled compound somewhere, it was actually inside a building, there's a hidden ramp, and you're supposed to get out, right? And you're supposed to find the ramp and jump out. What they tell you is you've got to get out of the compound, right? What they want you to do is find the ramp. However, people discovered that you could drop a landmine near the wall, drive up very fast straight at it and blow yourself up in the air and over the wall and get out. And then you could drive around outside forever because it did not detect that you were outside. Because what they were detecting for was the use of the ramp, not, use the landmine. So, they might achieve their victory condition in some way that you don't expect. So you need to check for what you told them to do, not for what you want them to do. And, this again, it's failing to support lateral thinking. The landmine trick was really cool. It was great. Hey, I'm outside, So, easy modes that are not. So, I'm a loser, okay? I'm a lousy gamer. I should not tell you this because you'll lose all respect for me. But the reality is I'm getting older. I've got arthritis. I don't have all the time in the world. I cannot afford to die 15 times. So I put everything on the easiest mode I possibly can. And typically after about 10 minutes of play, I also go find a cheat code and a walkthrough. And too many shooters make the last level or room way harder than everything else. It's like, okay, we're on easy mode, we're going along, we're killing things, and then we get to the last room and there's this spike, where it's just unbelievably insanely hard. No, I chose easy mode for a reason. And again, this kind of goes back to that designer attitude of, you are my opponent, I must humiliate you. And in fact, that's not the way to think. They put it on easy mode for a reason, and some designers say, well, but that means they would end too soon, and that's not good. Why not? Is it any skin off your nose if they get done too soon? Who cares? If they want to play it on a hard mode, they can go back and put it on a hard mode. So, easy mode means easy. Damn it. My basic rule of thumb is if you put it on easy mode, you should be able to pick up the controller and smash yourself in the face with it and win the game. Bad user interface design. Final Fantasy VIII again. Uninterruptible movies. Those really long spell animations, which look super hyper excitingly awesome the first time, and they look pretty cool the second, third, and fourth times, and after that you were sick to death of them. Game cinematics must be interruptible. They must be interruptible. Even if it contains essential content. Some people say, well, we're not going to make it interruptible because there's something really important in there, and if they miss it, then they won't be able to understand what's going on later. No. That's the player's fault, right? If they're playing the second time, they don't need that information. So, they want to interrupt. So you really, really must make them interruptible. Also, ideally, you should actually let the player go back and see movies that they have seen again. Because if there really is something important in there that they need to see, then often they might miss it, and so you need to provide a way for looking at it again. And The Longest Journey kept a library of movies you have seen, and then you could go back and look at them anytime you wanted to. Unworkable interface elements. Sometimes people get a little too clever for their own good with user interface elements. They really need to be clearly visible no matter what mode or environment the player is in. So here we have Half-Life Opposing Force. Half-Life Opposing Force had these little green crosshairs. That worked great until you put on the night vision goggles. Then the whole world was green and you couldn't see a thing. And so it just, it became unworkable because you had moved into this other mode. So, you need to switch to another color when you put on the night vision goggles. Bad configuration menus. You would not believe the amount of email I get about bad configuration menus. I don't even remember what the problems were with all of these things. One of them was driver 3. I do remember this one. You couldn't change the configuration of the inputs, adjusting for left and right hand and all that kind of stuff until you had played the first level. It's like, okay, you have to play a level our way, and then we'll let you reconfigure your input devices. Why? You need to let people configure their input devices at any time on one screen and allow them to save multiple variants for different players. Because another thing that often happens is, okay, on this screen you get to select which button you want to configure, and then you switch to another screen where you figure out what you're going to do with it, and then you switch back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. No. Put it all on one screen and use scrolling list boxes if you have to. If there's so many inputs that you can't show them all just right there, then use scrolling list boxes, but do it on one screen. And also, please allow for multiple players. Now, you as students, I'm not saying you should do this now, because, you have games to make for class or whatever that you don't have time to get, to put in niceties like this. But in a professional game, there's really no excuse. And when you think about all the things that can go wrong in games, the bad mechanics, the bad AI, the ugly art, the bad user interfaces, of all the things that you can do wrong in a game, why something so stupidly trivial as the configuration menus? And I think the reason people get this wrong so often is because they think it's trivial. Well, it is trivial, but so they put it off to the end and then they rush it. Say, oh, well, we'll do that right at the end. And then everybody's in terrible crunch mode and they're trying to fix all the bugs. Oh, yeah, we got to do the configuration menus. Okay, that's fine, that's done. And nobody actually really tries it. So there's just a bunch of ways to do this wrong. No save or pause game feature. Now, this is the subject of considerable religious warfare in the game industry, because there are some people who really, really hate being allowed to save. They think, I want that feeling of I must continue or I will die. For those kind of people, you give them checkpoints. But my attitude is, it's the player's machine. It's not your machine. And if the doorbell rings or the phone rings, or it's their little sister's turn to use the console, they need to be able to save it now, and not say that's just too bad. So Echo the Dolphin, which admittedly is now a very old game, just didn't have any way to save or pause the game. And if you pause the game, well, then Echo was just going to drown, wasn't he? So, or not paused it, but just walked away from it. And this is a really cheap way of making games harder without any work by the designer, and that's lazy design. And there's some people who say, "Oh, saving is cheating," and I think that's weak design. I don't think saving is cheating. For myself, of course, because I'm a loser and I play very badly and so on, I save constantly. But that's so what? I mean, once again, is that any skin off the designer's nose? We're not in competition with each other. Games without maps. This is kind of a personal thing for me. Right now, I have absolutely no idea where the front door is in this building. I think maybe it's over there, but I'm not really sure. When I'm inside, my sense of direction is shot. I'm all right outside, but when I'm inside, it's hopeless. So I really need to be able to find my way around. And a game that tosses me into an area, the real world has stains on the carpet. It has peculiarities of the lighting. Every place looks a little bit different from every other place. I mean, even if you actually build a maze, out of concrete or something, there are going to be little things that make it, parts of it look different from other parts. The game worlds, often are not like that, and so they just don't offer the same kind of visual cues. So getting the player lost, in my opinion, is another cheap way to lengthen the game, and I don't care for it. Now, so Oddworld, much as Odyssey, you just had to hunt around, and there was no way to figure out what was where, and you got no map at all. Interstate 76 handled this a little bit different way. They didn't want to give you an auto map. They didn't want to tell you perfectly exactly where you were at all times. They didn't have a mini-map or a radar screen. What they did is they gave you a hand-drawn map that looked like it was on the back of a grocery bag, and it was up to you to kind of compare that map with the landscape around you and figure out where you were, which is actually how we used to do it in the days before GPS. You went to the gas station, you bought a road map, but it didn't tell you where you were. You had to work out where you were, but then you could follow the map. And Interstate 76, being set in 1976, did the same thing. And that seems like a reasonable compromise between the total exact auto map that tells you exactly where you are and nothing at all. Puzzle games that won't let you undo and redo. So here's Free Cell, one undo, that's all, right? And, in my opinion, if a puzzle game is reversible, like a Rubik's Cube or Free Cell, it should allow undo and redo, because repeatedly starting from scratch is boring. You get that single undo in Free Cell, and then once you've done it, and then you get hosed, and it's like, then you have to start over from the beginning, and that's just not fun. So this is a game that is kind of like Free Cell. It's called Four Towers. It has slightly different rules and slightly different numbers of piles and so forth. But it lets you undo and redo infinitely. So in fact, you can back up and back up and back up and try another tack and back up and try another tack and so on until you get it worked out. And so your chances of winning are a lot higher. But it's actually more fun because it doesn't just say, you lose. It says, okay, didn't work, try again. And that was fun. And this is not a hard thing to do. I mean, undo, redo. It's kind of like in Microsoft Word. So you should know. Bad programming. Games that run too fast. Okay, this again is kind of a personal thing. So this is a very, very, very old Electronic Arts game. It was designed to run on, I don't know, the Commodore 64 and the Amiga and stuff like that, and the IBM XT, which was a 4.77 megahertz machine. And when I bought it, it was very famous. And when I bought it, I had an 80386 machine, which was like 30 megahertz. And so I thought, this is going to be great. I'm finally going to get to play StarCraft, even though it's 6 or 7 or 8 years old. This is so cool. And I put it in, and it started up, and it went, brrr. It's like, what? So it's, it was generating animation frames as fast as it could, assuming that you had a slow processor. And if you had a fast processor, it was unplayably fast. This is bad programming, people. Don't do this. The very first game I ever wrote commercially was the PC side client for an America Online game. So this was back before you actually had the big client. Anyway, it was even before it was called America Online. But it started up this separate game that was my client, and it had to run on everything from a 4.77 megahertz, IBM XT, up to whatever was the fastest thing around at the time, my 30 megahertz 80386. And so what I did is I generated the frames based on a hardware timer, and it only advanced the animation when the hardware timer ran out, and that way it was absolutely locked to real time. And in fact, I can put that thing in my machine now, and it still runs at the same speed, which is my way of saying I'm an awesome programmer. But it's also my way of saying there's no excuse for not doing this right. So if you've got spare cycles, use them on something else. Use them on something intelligent. Generate in-betweens for your animations. Generate better AI, better pathfinding, whatever it is. But don't just crank out animation cycles as fast as you can. Stupid monsters. Doom was a very famous example, of course. They would just lumber towards the player mindlessly until they got shot and died. And Doom 3 did exactly the same thing, despite being, a decade later? It's time for smart monsters. So Half-Life has smarter monsters, no question. And, I think that makes the game more interesting. It makes the game more challenging. Doom is kind of the equivalent of a fairground shooting gallery. You can really pretty much predict where the little ducks are going to go. Something more interesting gives the player a better challenge. Bad pathfinding. Age of Empires. I don't know if any of you played the first version of this game before they passed it. You would draw a box around 10 people and say, okay, you guys go over there, and 8 of them would go over there, and 2 of them would wander off into the weeds, and you could, what the heck are you doing? Go with them! No! And I think part of the problem was that the guys at the back of the box were assuming that the guys at the front of the box were an obstacle. So they would be trying to find their way around their own teammates and go some other place, and it just looked crazy. So nothing makes a smart game look stupid like bad pathfinding. The game seems really cool, and there's all kinds of cool stuff going on, and you draw a box around a bunch of people, and then they go someplace completely idiotic, and immediately your impression of the programmers that made this game has dropped 50%, right? So one simple rule of thumb, if you tell a group to go someplace, they should stick together if they're going around large obstacles. So, so they all go around the same side of a big hill, and you don't have 2 of them going around the other way. But they should filter among small obstacles. You don't want them all going around the right-hand side of a tree, in a forest. They should move among them. Pathfinding is not easy. I used to work in the electronics industry where our job was figuring out how to route the wiring on silicon chips, and it was a big job. And doing it in a changing environment with a lot of units moving around is a CPU-intensive process. But there are also algorithms out there that show you how to do it. Open source public algorithms. So get this right. Bad level design. Difficulty moving in 3D spaces bugs the heck out of me. It needs to be really clear if something is a wall or a floor. In fact, we can climb up pretty darn steep spaces if we want to. So, if something is going to absolutely be a wall, it really ought to look like a wall, or it really ought to look solid and inaccessible. And the thing with Tomb Raider is that, it really, occasionally, it gave you very little slack about where you jump from. You had to be standing on the exact correct pixel to make certain jumps. And particularly in a third-person game where you don't have as much control over your movement, that can be really awkward. I really dislike difficulty moving in 3D space. Just give the player some slack. Generally, let them go where they want to go, unless there's something that they really, really shouldn't pass through, and then make it completely clear that they can't. Boring and stupid mazes. This goes all the way back to the original Adventure, the very first text adventure game, where there was a maze, every room of which was described as you were in a maze of twisty little passages all alike. And you moved for the next one, go north. You're in a maze of twisty little passages all alike, go south. And so it became a big pain. You had to solve it by brute force, and that was not any fun. So if you're going to include a maze at all, and mazes are really kind of passé these days, but you still occasionally see them, they need to have some sort of an underlying principle. It's like the puzzles, that I told you about earlier, that the player can deduce. They can figure out what's going on with this maze, and then learn to solve it. A switch in one place opens a door a mile away. This was another trial and error time waster from Doom. It slows the player down without actually challenging them in any meaningful way. You run up, you flip this switch, nothing happens. You run elsewhere throughout the complex, there's a door that's closed, there's no switch anywhere around. You really don't have any idea what it is that opens it. You hunt around and hunt around and hunt around, and eventually you decide, or even worse, there's a switch here that opens a door over there for exactly 15 seconds. And if you don't run like the wind in the exact path, then it's going to be closed when you get there. Boring. In the real world, strangely enough, doorknobs are in the door. Maybe not in nuclear power plants, but otherwise, if you want a door to be locked, then lock it fine and store the key someplace reasonable. Again, this is just kind of cheap, lazy, sloppy design. Excessive use of darkness. Doom 3. Doom 3, you could carry a flashlight or a weapon, but not both. So, and the idea is, darkness, it's going to be very atmospheric. It's going to be very scary and badass. No, it's not. I'm just bumping into things. So, in fact, I ragged on Medal of Honor Allied Assault for the respawning Nazis. But in fact, I think Medal of Honor Allied Assault did darkness very well because they created a sort of a purple glow in the sky that enabled you to have just enough light to see by and still get an impression that it was dark. Now, admittedly, in 44, Normandy, there was not a purple glow in the sky. But I'm kind of willing to give them that because it works for the game. And so that was a good use of darkness that felt dark, yet you could still see what was going on. You have 30 seconds to figure out this level before you die. You walk through a door, you're looking around, okay, what do I do in here? Arrow through the neck. Right? And you go back and you do it again, and arrow through the neck again. The Immortal was a game that was based entirely on this principle. Right? All it did was kill you again and again and again and again without any warning. Fortunately, because you were immortal, you respawn pretty quickly. But that's just boring. I mean, yes, you can figure out your way through it a little at a time. But it's called learn by dying. Learn by dying is not a good principle. So my general feeling is, if there's 3 ways to safety or possibly safety, 3 ways out of a place, at least one of them should lead to safety. Okay, the player can die twice, but the 3rd time they should survive. Bad content. This is my own fault. I worked on Madden Football 64. I was responsible for writing the audio play-by-play for Madden Football for several years. John Madden and his broadcasting partner at the time, Pat Summerall, And it was my job to actually write text for every single possible thing that could occur in a football game. Every single conceivable event. I screwed up one year, I forgot one. I totally left out turnover on downs. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, they ought to say something. And when there was a turnover on downs in Madden that year, they were just silent. Just nothing happened. So that was a mistake. But that's not what this is about. This is about not having enough, and so hearing the same darn thing over and over. Now, the reason that happened in Madden 64 is that Madden 64 was the last of the cartridge games. And there was not enough room in the cartridge to store all this stuff. So most cartridge players actually turned off the play-by-play because they got sick of hearing the same clips over and over, right? So there's no longer any excuse for this, right? We have DVDs and so on. So any given situation, my general rule of thumb is even the rarest, there should be 5 different clips that you can play. The longer a clip is, the less often it should be played. So if it's for something that's really long and obscure, you should hear it once a game or once a half, and then you should check it off and not play it again. Play something else. So you've got to write tons and tons of material so that you get several different ways of saying, interception and fumble and different runbacks and so forth. Fantasy killing elements. So this is kind of like conceptual non sequiturs. Baldur's Gate. You see your father murdered before your very eyes in a cutscene right at the beginning of the game, and then a bunch of other people come up to you and ask you to solve their problems. What? My father's been killed right before my eyes, you idiot! There's all kinds of things that take people out of the fantasy. I personally am really into immersion in games, and I realize that a lot of players aren't. They want to optimize the game mechanics. They don't really care about the story, the character, the setting, any of that stuff. They simply want to grind on the mechanics and get the most out of them. That's okay. But for me, it's about enjoying the place I'm in. And so anachronisms, bad writing, inside jokes, and irrelevant mini-games. The funky little mini-games in BioShock. What was that about? It's like, I'm shooting my way through this mysterious Ayn Rand dystopia that's underwater, and it's got all this fabulous Art Deco artwork, and now I got to play a mini game. So that takes you out of the fantasy. A key quality of the best computer games is harmony. Everything belongs together. It is part of a unified whole, and when you play it, you can feel it. When you play a game that has harmony, you just know everything is working together to create this single experience. And stuff that destroys harmony is just a bad thing. Pointless surrealism. This was, unfortunately, one of Electronic Arts' games. I had nothing to do with it, I'll tell you now. A lot of people try to do surrealism without actually having studied enough art history to know what it really means. And so surrealism is not just being weird for the fun of it. You fight your way through the legions of doom to get to the master control room in the middle of everything, and suddenly you find that there's a clown in there. and somebody decided it would be real surreal and crazy to put a clown in the middle of the master control room. No. That's pointless surrealism. Real surrealism has an underlying point. It's meant to make people think. It's meant to make people stop and say, that doesn't make any sense. What's really going on here? Dali's melting wristwatches. Is he saying something about time, about relativity? Why would wristwatches melt? It's very weird, but it does make you think about it. The Labyrinth of Time was a good example of bad surrealism. Planescape Torment was a fabulous example of good surrealism. It was all part of a harmonious, unified whole. It was weird as all get out. It was extremely strange. But everything was in there because it belonged there. It created this wonderful feeling of strangeness throughout, whereas the Labyrinth of Time just seemed kind of tedious and self-indulgent. Low poly trees. This was a problem when I first wrote this lecture. Then it began to not be a problem on the PC, and now it's a problem again on mobile phones. So, Darkstone. They had a weird blocky green umbrella thing that I was supposed to believe was a tree. It looked terrible. Basic rule of thumb, a good-looking sprite is better than a bad 3D model. Those of you in here who may be artists, make a good-looking sprite. Don't make a bad 3D model. And you know, with basic rule of thumb for anything in game design, if you can't do something well, don't do it at all. You know, if you cannot make something attractive, don't make something unattractive instead. You know, just leave it out. Poor acting and writing. I said that bad acting takes me out. You know, I got into about the first 3 rooms of Resident Evil, and by that time I was rooting for the monsters. Kill them! Kill them, please! Never let them speak again. You know, it ruins emotional tension. And the fact is, writers are paid garbage. Okay? So you might as well hire a good one. Now, good writing is cheap. Writing is cheap generally, so there's really no excuse for having bad writing. The Longest Journey had good writing. You know, it had a credible dialogue. It had characters that had depth, and the acting was in fact believable. You know, we often have extremely poor voiceover, and the Longest Journey's voiceover was pretty decent. Neat and tidy explosions. I kind of don't need to say this one after 9/11. But, you know, explosions are not good, clean fun. And I feel like we should make an effort to give that impression. I feel like, you know, that bombs ruin things. They mess stuff up. They harm lives. And, you know, and of course part of this comes down to, do we have the horsepower? Do we have the memory to keep all the data around, you know, to show that a building has destroyed something? But I think it's worth making the effort to try to indicate that when a bomb has gone off, something bad has happened. I'm interested in making a moderately multiplayer role-playing game about the Blitz, which was a period during the Second World War when Hitler was terror bombing London and other cities in Britain. And when I make this game, I want the gradual disintegration of London to really look like it and to feel like it. You know, you don't just have a building blow up and then it's just sort of cleanly not there anymore. I want the place to look like it's falling apart, which is what really happened. So explosions should leave at least some wreckage. Huge breasts and other juvenilia. Yes, it does make money. I admit that. But it also gives normal people the impression that we are a bunch of drooling adolescent morons. It encourages Congress to try and censor us. One of the reasons that I set up the IGDA in 1994 was because of Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat, Congress freaked out, and they called us on the carpet, and they said, what's going on with this stuff? And unfortunately, Nintendo got up there and they said, oh, we're very family friendly. No blood in our games. We've never been about violence. You know, we're cool. And then Sega got up after them and held up a huge blue gun that was called the Nintendo Eliminator and said, yeah, right. So we ended up pointing fingers at each other, and so Congress said, you guys are a bunch of drooling adolescent morons, and we're going to censor you if you don't do something about it. So that is why we set up the Entertainment Software Rating Board. That, not we, when I say we, I don't mean me, the industry. But that is also why I set up the IGDA, because nobody was out there fighting our corner for artistic freedom. However, with freedom comes responsibility. I am totally opposed to censorship. I am totally in favor of self-control. And I think, you know, there's a point beyond which you should not go for certain things. You know, creating just randomly juvenile content hurts the whole industry. It discourages non-gamers from starting to play. You know, the latest, when they finally brought out Duke Nukem Forever, those of you who have seen it will know about the excrement jokes and all the rest of it, and it's, you know, it's just harmful. So that's a list of some of the Twinkie denial conditions. I broke them up in in these different ways: bad writing, bad gameplay, and so forth. But there's other ways to slice them as well, and that is the kind of underlying mental approaches of designers that cause them to make them. And so some of them are challenges that are solvable only by trial and error. That's kind of a lazy, sloppy design approach, and it should not be confused with legitimate exploration or practice. Okay, if the player has to explore, find things out, or practice at things, that's one thing. But making them solve a puzzle purely by trial and error is poor. Non sequiturs and pointless illogicality, which is not the same as necessary simplification. We're not going to worry about rebalancing the fuel in your Boeing 747 so there's correct amounts in each of the tanks, because we don't really care about that. That is necessary simplification. It's not accurate, but it's not wrong. A non sequiturs and being pointlessly illogical harms us. Designer egotism, vanity, or showing off. Look how cool I am. I'm a game designer. I can smack you around. No. Confusion between hard and enjoyable. This again is a classic. Hard is not the same as enjoyable. It might be for a very limited subset. But let me tell you something about how the market is changing. We began with arcade games, right? And arcade games were hard, and they were designed to be hard because that's the only way we got any money. We had to kill you rapidly, approximately once every 3 minutes, in order to get another quarter out of you. That attitude stayed with us for a long time. Kill the player. But that was kind of pointless when you moved on to games that the player didn't have to put a quarter in for. So we eventually got over that, but it kind of hangs around in the back of people's minds. And now, having moved on from the arcade game to kind of the PC and console game, now to the casual free-to-play game, this is way not cool. The casual free-to-play games do not do this to you. They need to encourage the player to keep playing and to be having a good time. I'm sure that a lot of you have nothing but contempt for casual free-to-play games. That's understandable in some cases. But that is, in fact, now the majority market. Zynga is bigger than Electronic Arts. Live with it. Laziness making the player work so you don't have to. I've talked enough about that. Sloppiness and inattention to quality. Do it well or don't do it at all. Leave it out if it looks ugly. Leave it out if it sounds ugly. Leave it out if it doesn't work right. And being deliberately, needlessly offensive. Another thing that bugs me is games that go out of their way to insult the player. The games that when you do something wrong. I mean, I had a knockoff of Minesweeper for my mobile phone, and Minesweeper is kind of random. I mean, sometimes you just hit a bomb, and when it popped up and you hit a bomb, what it said is, "Well, better learn the rules." It's like, come on, I know the freaking rules, okay? Don't get in my face about the rules. And I ditched it because I was irritated at being insulted all the time by this thing. It was just being pointlessly offensive. So, the No-Twinkie Database is located here. This is my website, designersnotebook.com. I have a section of design resources. And, by the way, case does matter. So, this is a Unix-based system. Design _resources / no_Twinkie database. And this contains a list of all the Twinkie denial conditions, of which there are now quite a few, because I'm up to column 13 or 14, I think. And each one contains a link into the original column, so you can see what I said about it. So if you're interested in going to see them all, that's where they are. And I know this is really crass, but I wrote some books. I know some of you are probably using them in these classes. Fundamentals of Game Design is my introductory game design textbook, and then the new one that just came out recently is called Game Mechanics Advanced Game Design, and it introduces a really cool, free prototyping tool for rapidly prototyping game mechanics called Machinations. And Machinations is available online, and you can use it all you like, and Game Mechanics tells how to use it. And it's also a general introduction to the study of game mechanics. Well, not an introduction, it's advanced, but a study of game mechanics. And so, if any of you happen to already own any of these games, or any other books, or any other book I've written, I will be happy to sign it. Thank you very much for your time and attention. So, I am lazy. I'm going to sit down and take questions. Yes?
My name is Winston Powell. I noticed you were talking a little bit about the lateral thinking and creating devices and stuff for players while they're playing. And I've noticed a lot of times when you're creating a game, the most practical solution to a puzzle isn't always the most practical solution to an average player. That you think a different way while you're developing.
Right.
Like maybe that switch made sense to you for being over there, to trigger that door over there, for whatever reason while you're developing.
Yeah.
Of course, to an average player doesn't make any sense. What's a good way to get into that mode of thinking, to like switch back out of your developer thinking and switch to the layman's?
Ask your mom to play it.
Okay.
Seriously, yeah. They're not playtesting with your friends. They're all gamers, and half of them are game developers. You need to playtest with the weirdest, most random collection of people you can get, because they're the ones who will find the completely oddball stuff that you never thought about. Yes.
You said don't make games too hard. At Game Developers Conference last week, I went to the postmortem for FTL and Space Chem, and those are both really hard games that they made for themselves, and they've been very successful.
Very successful among whom? I mean,
Space Chem made $700,000. I don't think there was more than one developer on it. And
right.
FTL's made over $200,000 for two guys.
Right. That's really great, but that's really pathetic.
Well, it's not mass market, but I'm talking about in the market.
Well, right. So in fact, they have aimed.
It's not just Zynga, it's indies.
Right.
And I would be happy with making $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
A game that I cared about and I made.
Right. So yeah. I mean, if you are content to limit your market to that group, then fine. My advice here is general. I mean, yes, you can make insanely hard games. Ninja Gaiden, God knows somebody plays Ninja Gaiden. But it's not the right way to reach the largest number of people. So I guess this is essentially you need to choose your target market and hit it. I just think that is an increasingly shrinking percentage of the overall. Those of you who consider yourself hardcore gamers, you are on the verge of becoming dinosaurs. Simply because the market itself overall is expanding and your percentage of the market is shrinking proportionally. So, there was a question back there. Yes.
What would you say about the level of customization in games? Like, a lot of players tend to want to be able to customize their characters or even customize the environment in their way.
Right.
But that also adds a lot of stress on the game developers. It adds time in the game that people need to spend on it. So what do you say about that?
Well, there are two kinds. There's cosmetic customization, and then there's customizations that interact with the core mechanics. Cosmetic customization, like change the color of your racing car, you don't have to play test much. You put it in, and people can do it, and that's fine, and you might as well put in as much as you can reasonably afford to do because it doesn't harm anything. Customizations that interact with the core mechanics, you have to be really careful because it does take a staggering amount of playtesting, to anticipate and account for every possible weird thing somebody might do. This is why, it costs, about $75 million minimum to make an MMORPG. These people can go in and they can create any sort of avatar they like, and the whole thing has to work and not break and not generate deadlocks or runaway profits or any of those kinds of things. So, I would say first concentrate on the gameplay. Gameplay is the challenges, the actions, the activities the player will undertake. I always tell everybody, start with that first before you do the environment, before you do anything else. The characters, the story, anything, the gameplay. Then once you're pretty satisfied that you've got that working right, then you can afford to start adding customizations. But it is dangerous. Players love it, but it is dangerous. And it comes down to sort of how much time you've got. So there isn't an easy answer. Somebody over here, a couple of people, yes.
So you were talking a little bit about the whole going casual, keeping it easy, appealing to a larger audience. But wouldn't there be a pretty easily correlated metric here between early arcade games when everyone was kind of casual and moving to a hardcore space and where we are now? So, put it in a board game perspective. We have the war games that take a week to play. They all spawned from earlier games such as Go that were much simpler in complexity. Mm-hmm. And already we're seeing a correlation for that in casual spaces like Bejeweled. From first Bejeweled to where we are now with Match 3 games, they're so deep in complexity now and depth. Wouldn't you say that what you're saying may be the case to introduce people to a new market? But once they're introduced, even the mother playing Bejeweled will eventually expect that higher complexity, the harder challenges and everything. So
well, yeah. don't confuse complexity with difficulty.
Well, and I understand that. Yeah, there are different elements there, but some of the things that you went over kind of touched on the point of keep it easy, have that easy mode, or make it appeal to larger audiences. But wouldn't it also kind of correlate that those larger audiences will want more in the near future?
Well, some of them will want more.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the subset will, continue to get smaller the more complicated it gets. There are families that will play Monopoly that wouldn't dream of playing Civilization, the board game.
Yeah.
People that will, some people will not move beyond Candyland and into, into Settlers of Catan. Actually, Settlers of Catan is, it's actually a very accessible game, really.
Yeah.
But so, what I was, yes, I'm not saying everybody should just make casual games.
Yeah.
Not by any means. What I'm saying is that well, I'm saying a variety of things. One of them is easy mode means easy. If you put in an easy mode, it really needs to be easy. But I'm also saying that you need to modulate difficulty appropriately and introduce people to things and so on. And that I think just sort of throwing people in at the deep end of the pool and giving them an insanely difficult challenge with no explanation of what to do and so on, which is the arcade approach, is really kind of passé. We do now tell people, kind of what they're supposed to do, and yes, there is a group of people that like that, but it's not quite the same. As I said, it's a kind of a shrinking percentage of the market. So, growth in complexity is great, and if you can lead people into it smoothly, then that's fine. Yeah. You had a question.
Yeah. What's your take on just random numbers in games? XCOM comes to mind immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that game?
Yeah. In fact, I just met the guy that made it 2 nights ago.
Awesome. So one thing I can't stand in games is when 5 of your guys have, say, an 80% chance to hit, and they all miss. I feel like I lost not because I made bad decisions, but I lost because the game gave me bad numbers.
Right. Well, I was talking to him about a sort of a similar phenomenon, and about XCOM. In XCOM, it's possible to screw up fairly early on in the game in such a way that it becomes unwinnable like 10 hours later. If you don't get your economy growing smoothly and efficiently, then the game, you just can't win. And he sort of acknowledged that XCOM was made at a time when we really did expect people to just kind of suck it up. That, okay, you had bad luck, too bad, you're just going to have to start over and do it again. And that, for the most part, we really don't do that very much in games. And, of course, now a lot of hardcore gamers say that we lead people by the hand too much. We make sure that they can never fail too badly, or you die and you respawn again in 2 minutes with no harm and that sort of thing. So, I think the answer partly depends on your player, and that there's probably a happy middle ground somewhere. Certainly, like I said, bad luck in long games. Where you spent 30 hours trying to reach the end, and then you get some phenomenal piece of bad luck and you just die, is not acceptable. That's the player has invested too much, and you're failing to reward that investment. So, in a really short game, I mean, if you have bad luck in Minesweeper, okay, fine. So you're 5 guys, all of whom 80% to hit. It sort of depends on whether that happens at the beginning of the game or the end of the game in XCOM.
I guess my thing there is they have a mode where you can't reload. So if you take 5 guys that you invested 10 hours training, they all die because you got bad numbers.
Yeah.
That's an easy one.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's just one of those games that those are the breaks.
Yeah.
And
is that bad design, or would you say that's?
I wouldn't call it bad design. I would call it a game where you better be prepared for it, I guess, I would call it slightly dated design. You know, we just don't do that very often anymore. Yeah.
Sid Meier's addressed that a few years ago, and when they told the players the odds, your odds are 3 to 1. Well, you rolled poorly, you lost. But I had 3 times as many guys, I should win.
Yeah.
And so they started fudging it. Even though they said the odds are this, they actually weren't. They were making it a little bit more in the player's favor because of player perception and inability to understand probabilities.
Yeah, I can easily believe it. Lying to the player is okay if you're not being mean to them. Yes.
All right, my question was about cutscenes. You said they should always be skippable.
Yeah.
What about the compromise some games make where it won't be skippable the first time you see it, but it is every subsequent time?
You know, I think they should be skippable every time. What if it's the 15th time you've played the game? You know, I don't see that that's necessary. I mean, I understand what they're trying to do, but you know, if you have played the game before, there's really no need for it. So I think they should just always be skippable, and that there should be a way to go back and see it again. The combination of being skippable and having a way to see it again. I don't insist on the full set of VCR controls. How old am I? I said VCR. But you know, with rewind and frame at a time, but at least start over and see it again or interrupt it. Seems like enough. You had a question.
I've been seeing a rising market in esport games, especially League of Legends. A lot of people play here, and it's becoming really popular. Do you think that the market is going more to the casual side or more to the esports side?
It is exploding crazily in all directions. I wouldn't like to say that it's going more towards an esports side. I think esports are a growing phenomenon, and they will find their place, and they will probably stay there, but they're not going to drive anything else out. There was this explosive growth in guitar music games for a while, just unbelievable growth, and that has really kind of leveled out now, and we're sort of at the point where, and I think they they're not going to make Guitar Hero anymore. We kind of did that, and we saturated the market, and there will continue to be dance games. Of course, there's always new music coming along. So, but I think it's these curves do settle out somewhere. And I think esports, will go somewhere where, maybe high, maybe low, but they will go somewhere and then settle out. There was a question over here by somebody I can't see at all. Yes, hi.
Hi. I just want to know what your take was on the latest trend of forcing online in order to play a single-player game.
Yeah, I predicted that was going to happen in 1995. And I didn't predict that it would happen in 1995. In 1995, I predict that would happen. I think it's a bad thing. I think it may be inevitable unless we change our business models entirely so we don't care about piracy anymore. But it doesn't. We don't have the infrastructure to make it work now. First, not all Americans have internet access. Not all of them have high-speed internet access, and people's servers go down, and that's bad. You can't do that until you can guarantee people that they're going to be able to do it. I mean, it's like you can pretty much now count on everybody in America to have a telephone. You can't count on everybody to have a mobile phone, but you can count on them to have a telephone, right? And the telephone's availability, its uptime, is like 99.99995%, which was a standard set down by, Bell Labs years ago. And when the internet gets there, then maybe that will be okay, but it's definitely not okay now. And America, strangely enough, despite our technological prowess, is actually behind Europe in the availability of the internet simply because we have such wide open spaces. And there's a lot of people that are, out in the middle of Iowa who don't have, fiber optic cable to their home. So I'm opposed to it until it gets more reliable. Yes.
Sorry. How do you teach the player a lesson, or tell them, hey, you're doing this wrong, without being too hard on the player or being too hand-holding to the player?
Well, there's sort of a variety of tactics. Partly it depends on what it is that they're trying to do. Probably you all know what happens in God of War, where this thing pops up that says, "Gosh, it looks like you suck. Why don't you play on an easier level?" Boy, does that upset people. But I think it depends on kind of what happens when they fail. How far back do you knock them?
Right.
If you really harm them badly, you take away all their stuff, and you make them start over, then that's way too much. On the other hand, if there's no penalty at all for failing, then you might as well not have the concept of failing. So I played the Lord of the Rings Online, and in the Lord of the Rings Online, when you die, for the next 10 minutes you play at lower ability, and then it comes back after a little while, and that's your penalty. But they don't take away all your stuff like they did in Ultima Online, or God help us, EVE Online.
Right. Oh, God.
So, I guess I don't really have an obvious answer to that. It sort of depends on what the nature of the challenge is and what is sort of an appropriate response to the level of failure. On the whole, though, we do want to, by and large, keep people pleased and coming back. And that is doubly true with these games that are based on a freemium model or, free-to-play or something like that. Where, in the good old days when we sold you a game in a box, once you bought the box, we didn't care. You like it, hate it, we don't care, right? You paid for it, suckers. We can't do that anymore. And as a result, we do have to hold your hand to whatever extent is necessary to prevent you from leaving in anger. So there isn't a simple answer. Oh my, the questions are now coming thick and fast. Let's see, you in the back. And close enough. Yeah.
Well, I just had a question about just as far as kind of acknowledging like mechanics in a game without like actually breaking the suspension of disbelief. Like I know the Metal Gear series just blatantly breaks the fourth wall with that, just so that they can just get it across to the player, like just describing what it is that they're pressing, but they're doing it in a way where they're using the characters and the actual story to convey that to you. Do you think that that's still an acceptable practice, or do you still have to find a way to make it so that the player feels like they're doing it within the realm of the game?
Right. In the old days, we made them read a manual. I think at this point, because we don't make them read a manual, having a tutorial mode at the beginning of the game, where that explicitly teaches you button X does this, is perfectly fine and reasonable. I would, when possible, try to downplay that a little bit when you get deeply into the game. But it doesn't matter if it's a lightweight puzzle game. It only matters if it's a deep, rich, immersive story game where people are really trying to pretend that they're knights or dragons or whatever it is. Because when you're trying to be a knight and it says, press B to swing your sword, then that's kind of a fail. But make it fit to and really cartoony games. Really goofy stuff like Team Fortress 2. That's okay too, because nobody's really that immersed in Team Fortress 2 in a narrative sense. So that's okay. So you really just have to balance it against the extent to which you want narrative immersion. And if you do want narrative immersion, then yes, you should look for ways to hide that. Gentleman over here. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to ask what your thoughts were on, well, it's not really a recent trend, it's been going on for a while, of publishers and developers releasing games that aren't quite finished with the thought that, we'll just patch it later.
I think it's appalling. I think it's a rip-off of the consumer. I mean, that at least was one advantage of selling games in boxes. There was no way to patch a Genesis cartridge once you bought it. So we really, really did have to finish the game before we shipped it. And no, I think it's a ripoff. They do it because they're in a hurry and because they're under a lot of pressure and because games are harder and harder to build all the time. But I think it's disrespectful to the consumer. Someone else over there, yes.
You've already mentioned that you're not too happy with games like FTL, where it's kind of the really, really difficult and it's not really friendly to beginners. But what do you feel about games that, for example, add that kind of as a mode, as an extra difficulty? For example, Minecraft has hardcore mode, where if you die, you lose everything, your entire world.
That's great. Go nuts.
Mode.
I mean, Doom had nightmare mode. Absolutely go nuts. I mean, as hard as you like. My objection is when that's the only mode.
I guess my main question is, do you feel that it's worthwhile to add that when you're working on a game to explore adding that mode in? Or do you think that it's better to just stick with the standard kind of easy, normal, hard as far as a design standpoint goes?
If you're making a game for people with a job, don't bother. They don't have the time. It's. I would say it depends on your target audience and the kind of game that you're making. And super mega death hardcore Bejeweled. Don't. So fit it to your market, to the style of game that you have, the amount of time you have, because ultimately that's that will give you your answer. I don't object to them in principle, but it is not worth it for you, for certain kinds of games, certainly. Yes.
So I have a kind of a two-part question here. One, what's your thought on, I'll pick on Diablo again. You start off the game as a hero who's decided to kill the Lord of Hell, and all I can do is shoot a spark out of my fingers when I start the game. I don't have any of those abilities to start. But then my other part of the question is, do you think leveling is lazy design? Because the game never really gets harder. You're just getting stronger as other things get stronger, and the game never really changes. You never have to think more, do more. You just advance with the game.
Yeah. Right. I will open up another lecture. Let's see. Yeah, no. Let me see. Do I have my stuff in here on? No, I don't. Hold on. Well, I won't spend a whole lot longer on this if I can't immediately find it. I have kind of a lot of lectures. Oh, wait a minute. Rethinking challenges in games and stories. That's it. Let's see. Oh, where is it? Why can't I find it? Here we are. Okay, so there's a thing about difficulty. Here we go. So the absolute difficulty of a challenge is based on the kind of intrinsic skill required to defeat that challenge, right? So I'm trying to shoot an arrow at a target, and it depends on how big the target is and how far away the arrow is, and I can compute the intrinsic skill required based on that, right? That does not take into account other factors such as how long I've been doing it and other kinds of things. So, the relative challenge then is based on how big the whether I scale the difficulty appropriately. So a level 1 knight can defeat a level 1 troll, in 2 minutes. A level 5 knight should not be able to beat a level 5 troll in 2 minutes, right? That should actually get harder faster. You should not always scale up in difficulty exactly at the level as the player is, because here's what happens if you do. So the absolute difficulty goes up fine. The relative difficulty stays flat, so it takes exactly as long to defeat a level 5 troll if you're a level 5 knight as it did if you were a level 1 troll and a level 1 knight. Therefore, the player's perception of the difficulty is it actually goes down. And the reason is because they've gotten skilled as they play. So, you don't want to always match the player's difficulty level to their current character level. It actually needs to go up faster so that it accounts for their learning to play the game. So, this is the in-game experience that the player has had makes the difference. So that's the solution, or part of the solution. There's two other things that we can't control for. One of them is we know how long the player's been playing in this current example of the game. We know that you're 2.5 hours into this game. We don't know how many times you've played it before, and we don't know if you're a total badass. And so allowing the player to choose a difficulty level for themselves is our way of compensating for the fact that we don't know that. Yes?
Another thing you might have to account for is, like me, for example, sometimes I will play a game for a little while to get to a certain point, and then take a break for several months, come back to it, my skills.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean that's another factor that is simply out of our control, and so therefore that's why we say, okay, well you should go back to easy mode until you've gotten back in the groove again. Yeah. People are starting to leave. Should I shut up? What are our limits?
They're going back to work. Sorry.
It's not you.
Sorry? I mean, seriously, is there a time limit here? It's 4 o'clock.
No, there's.
Because I'll flap my jaws all night long.
And we'll stay here and listen.
Carry on.
Yeah, it's completely up to you and the audience.
Okay.
There's no time limit otherwise.
Okay. Well, let's give it a while longer. There obviously are still questions. You, sir.
Another difficulty question, I guess. What do you feel about, I guess, I don't really know how to put it, but I guess teaching the player through death sort of thing? Like you're not really intentionally killing the player. It's really like the game I'm thinking of is Demon Souls. I don't know if you played it. But the game, in essence, is easy. Like if you played it one time and you learn everything, you can easily speed run through it in like an hour or two. You've done it. But when you're first playing the game, you first start the game, you have no clue what you're doing. There's no training. There's no tutorial.
Right.
But it's basically learn as you go sort of gaming. And it's basically I need to learn to block. I need to learn to dodge roll. I need to learn to run away when he's about to swing instead of flailing around at him.
How bad does death hurt?
When you die, when you kill stuff, you get souls. When you die, you lose your souls and you go into a ghost form. If you die again, before you drop your souls on the ground, and if you die again before reaching the part where you died before, you lose all the souls completely. And the way you level up is through those souls.
Mm-hmm.
So you basically, if you die again before you reach your death spot, you lose all of the chance of leveling up.
And so you have to go back to the beginning of the level, or
you go back to a sort of a checkpoint, I guess. Sometimes it is the beginning of the level. Sometimes it's halfway in the level.
Yeah. Well, I am a teacher, so I believe in teaching people how to do stuff. It's like here's a problem I had as a kid. I grew up in Kentucky, and everybody in Kentucky was supposed to know how to play basketball through osmosis, right? Only nobody ever told me the rules. So they would hand me this ball, and they would say, "Go play basketball," and then I'd get called for a million, rule violations because I didn't know what they were. Because my family was a baseball family, and we did not actually care about basketball. So I had a bad time, and I feel like if you are going to let the player learn that way without a tutorial mode and without a manual and without anything, then you better not make dying hurt too badly.
I guess the beginning level is a tutorial level. I forgot about that.
Oh, okay.
So they do teach you circle as attack. Dodge.
They do teach you some stuff.
And then you die at the end.
I mean, well, in
Dive right in.
Yeah. Sorry?
Dive right in is an understatement.
Yeah, right. You know, in Banjo-Kazooie, I mean, it's an ancient game now, but, every now and then Bottles of Mole would pop up from nowhere and teach you a few new moves, and then he would go away, and you could try them out and stuff like that. But having to find out their existence entirely on your own seems a little tough, because it's trial and error, and I really hate trial and error. I mean, I just feel like, it wastes the player's time. So, somebody back there had a question.
More than a question, I was going to make a comment. You were saying the hardcore gamer where you become dinosaurs and extinct possibly at some point. Well, you didn't say extinct.
They won't become extinct. They'll do like what the real dinosaurs did and turn into birds.
What I'm saying is, I don't think the numbers will decrease, but that the casual gamer will increase.
Yes, I agree. The numbers will not decrease. The casual gamer will increase. This is exactly what happened with point-and-click graphic adventure games in the early 90s. Point-and-click graphic adventure games, I know it's hard to believe this now, but they used to be the biggest, most beautiful, most admired game form there was. And The Secret of Monkey Island and all those games, everybody was really impressed by them. Then we invented 3D hardware acceleration. And suddenly, all this other stuff exploded. And people started saying point-and-click adventures are dead. They were not dead. They were simply a smaller and smaller percentage of the overall market. But in fact, there's still people making them and still people playing them. This also is what's going to happen with, FPS shooters. That they're, as a percentage of the overall market, they will shrink, but they will not die. They will simply be not the most important thing anymore. Yes?
And to add to that, it's like we see right now a burst in FPS and things like that, and as an RPG gamer, that's slowly going down now. But that doesn't mean it's going to die off.
No, indeed.
It's like a roller coaster.
Well, and these things also have revivals too from time to time. I mean, I just went, so help me God, I went to the Adventure Game Developers Party at the Game Developers Conference, 4 days ago, and I was expecting to meet like 5 people, and it was packed. There was hardly room to stand, and so clearly there's more going on there than we thought, and and the same thing is going to be true of RPGs. I mean, when if you follow what goes on with Kickstarter, when Double Fine came out and Ron Gilbert said, I want to make another point-and-click adventure game, can I have whatever it was, $300,000, and suddenly he got $3 million. Or the people that are making Planescape Torment, they're taking the Planescape name off, but they're making another Torment game.
The Longest Journey,
Yep.
We've got a Kickstarter now to finally do the 3rd game.
Exactly. The only person I got a chance to talk to at that party was Ragnar Tornquist. So so it doesn't go away. It's just out of the public eye. The press is all enthused about shooters now, and it'll be something else later. But I have an entirely different lecture called Gaming in 2050. We're still going to have shooting, we're still going to have driving, we're still going to have role-playing, we're still going to have strategy, because each one of these things is orthogonal to everything else. It offers a game experience that's different. What the percentages of each will be, I have no idea, but they will be there. Yeah. Let me see.
It's like genres in music and fiction.
Yeah.
People still like the blues, they still like jazz and different variations, and they're always being recombined in new forms.
Yeah, exactly. People still go to hear, concerts of the Baroque. I mean, it's 400 years old now, but people are still listening to it. Yes.
What are your thoughts of video games as an educational platform?
Fantastic, amazing, and brilliant, provided that they're not just drill and practice. There were a bunch of really garbage games made in the 90s by people who jumped on the edutainment bandwagon, and they made just cheap drill and practice games.
Yeah, they scrapped on a game too.
Oh yeah, Math Blaster, worst educational game of all time.
But where in the world is that? San Diego and Oregon Trail?
Yeah, those are really cool. And I absolutely love that stuff, and I am convinced, once again, from my other lecture in 2050, that there will eventually be games in every single thing we teach. I mean, just anything you can imagine, we will start to use video games. I'm less enthused about what's called gamification, because what's happening with gamification is what happened in the 90s with edutainment. Namely, there's a big buzz right now. A lot of people who shouldn't be are claiming to be experts and making kind of cheesy, cruddy, tedious things in the name of the almighty dollar. So let me see. Various other questions. You?
One thing that's kind of common in games right now is the thing of kind of almost instant respawning. You start up the game, you go in, blast a couple people, you die, respawn, repeat, it gets really redundant. But some games do offer the kind of espionage, slow gameplay that actually makes the player think.
Right.
The thing is, with the first one, you get the player into the action and you keep them in the action, but it doesn't offer as much mind. It doesn't make them think as much.
Right.
So which do you think is more healthy for a game?
Oh, neither. It's all about the player. It really is. The way I teach people to design games is player-centric game design, and what that means is you imagine a representative player who's the sort of person that you would like to play your game. You go into their head, and they may not be like you, because if you're making a game for an 8-year-old girl, then you got to go into her head. We want to be able to make games for 8-year-old girls, but they can't make them themselves. So we got to learn to think like them. So you've got to learn to think like whoever your representative player is, and whether you want it to be a crazy run and gun Rambo style deathmatch, frenetic thing, or a stealthy, kind of Rainbow Six style tactical combat thing, is really up to you. And it depends on your player. And if you want to try to put both in one game, good luck to you. It's a mode, but it's just extra work. There's no one right answer for the majority of things about games. I've just given bad game No-Twinkie, so I've given a bunch of stuff to avoid. But in terms of aesthetic things or gameplay things, as long as you're making people happy, you're doing it right. It's a question of who you choose to make happy. Yes, sir.
What's your idea on doing things like if you solve a mini game, you can go in silent, or you can go the wall up and have an army come after you?
I don't entirely understand the question.
It's saying that using like an option to player the ability to either be stealthy or player to go through the game one way or another.
Right. Well, I really like games that let players approach a problem in different ways. We've gotten into the habit of making rail shooters recently because it's easier as designers, to make an essentially linear environment and just make the player fight his way through it and only do everything exactly one way. But I love letting the player approach a problem in different ways or have different modes of gameplay, which is kind of addresses what you were saying too. If there is more than one way to play, and they both work equally well, and they're equally entertaining, then that's great. You run into problems when you create a game where there's what's called a dominant strategy. And a dominant strategy means that there's only one way that's really the best, and any other approach is inferior and doesn't work as well. Then that gives the player a false choice, because of course they'll always pick the way that works best. But if you can offer the player multiple ways to play, and they're equally successful, then why not do it? If you can afford the time and the play testing to balance it. Yes.
With the current appearance and big push from Sony and Microsoft on motion gaming using the Kinect or controller, what would you suggest to designers trying to approach that, since it's kind of a new way to design games?
Well, to start with, you really do need to learn what the hardware does and how it works and how accurately. Funky input devices are very cool, but they represent something of a risk if you don't understand their limitations. So, for example, the current generation of Kinect, its resolution is 4 centimeters, right? So it actually can't detect trigger pull. That's too small. The next generation will probably get this down to 1 centimeter. But you need to know. And the other thing is that stuff like the Nintendo, the Wiimotes, they go out of calibration after a while. They don't stay calibrated, and so you have to use them in kind of limited sorts of ways. So even though as a designer you're not a programmer, you might not be a programmer. I am, but or was. You do need to know enough about the technology you're designing for so as not to specify out something that the programmers can't build. So, obviously one of the most useful things you can do is study existing games that use them to see what they did and whether you like that or not. I kind of think shake the Wiimote to run fast feels kind of bogus. So I wouldn't want to do that, but I'm aware that that's a thing you can do. So. Look at existing games that are already out there to see what they do, and learn the strengths and weaknesses and limitations of your hardware. I'm a consultant for some people that are making a game about, oddly enough, laparoscopic surgery. Surgeons are really competitive, and the laparoscopic surgeons, they have to, laparoscopic surgery is done through 2 little holes in the body. And so you have to work with these long things that kind of poke around, and it's really sort of awkward. And they need practice at this, and preferably not on human beings. And they have simulators, but they're boring. So these guys are making a video game, and it's going to have a high score table, so they can beat their chest. And one of the things these guys found out is they made these devices with Wiimotes in them. And they found out that the accelerometers that measure the movement are really not accurate enough. They get out of calibration too quickly. And so they use the sensor bar feature, the little camera that's in the end of the Wiimote, as well to keep them in calibration. That's one of those things where, they thought the device would do X, and it does, but only badly. So they had to, readjust their design to take into account the limitations. There was somebody over there, I thought.
Do we want to take a couple more questions?
Okay.
I have one here.
Yeah.
So, it was funny, back when Grand Theft Auto came out, the first one, I was talking to my friend, right, and he said, hey, there's this game that has all this controversial stuff, you got to run out and get it right away, before they take it off the shelves, right?
Right.
So I was like, yeah, man, that sounds great. So I ran right over to the store, got it, right? Controversy has boomed Rockstar's platform.
Yeah.
I mean, right from the beginning, it backfired on the parents, who were against all of the controversial stuff they threw in, so they kept throwing more and more and more.
Yeah.
There was one quote I read about somebody said, it's about time games have grown up, like movies have.
Yeah.
So they have mature content. So I knew you were talking about the juvenile behavior in some games.
Right.
Where it's just to be, crass. But, I mean, do you think that adding the mature content is just a way to make games more mature, or just, is it valuable? Adding that more mature content, do you think it adds to the games or not?
This is a medium. This is an art form, and an art form needs to be able to address tough issues. We are not toys. We are not only for children, and this is something that that the general public needs to come to agree, to believe and to understand right now. And for a long time we were in this toy category. And toys are regulated by the Consumer Product Safety Commission.
Yeah.
And they took lawn darts off the market because you could just be killed with a lawn dart, and nobody was saying censorship. You're censoring our lawn darts. But we're not a toy. We're an expressive artistic medium, and so we need to be able to address sophisticated issues. Here's an example of a game that got suppressed, not by the government, but by general public opinion, that I think should have been made. 6 Days in Fallujah. The Konami was making this game. I can't remember the name of the company that was working on it.
I worked on it.
Did you? Okay. Well, so you know what happened. People freaked out. They said it was too soon. And this was, just something that was way too visceral and immediate, and we shouldn't go there. Yet it's totally okay to make games about the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg, that kind of thing. And so, where's the line? Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I was under the impression that 6 Days in Fallujah was actually going to take a somewhat different approach to the usual sort of run-and-gun shooter, and was really going to treat war more like survival horror, which would be, I think, appropriate.
Yeah, there was a little bit of schizophrenia, I think, in the design, because they were working with the military with expert advisors.
Right.
And the main point was to tell their story authentically.
Right.
But they're making a game, which is an entertainment product, so the realism factor started to drop off, and so there were some silly things with physics that don't really happen, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the interesting, when they would pitch the game to different publishers, it was mostly met with positive, but there'd always be somebody in the room that would say, yeah, but there's a lot of people that are really anti the Iraq War, and this is just going to stir up stuff that we don't need, so we're going to pass.
Mm-hmm.
And I had actually left the company by the time Konami signed, and it was almost like 2 weeks later after saying, yes, we're going to do it, they said, no, we're not going to do it.
Right, yeah.
And I don't know how much of that was response to the eruption of controversy, but you could see how Fox News handled it.
Well,
they pandered to the lowest common denominator and make it look like, oh, they're trivializing the sacrifices of these brothers, husbands, sons, and so on. It's like, no, they're trying to tell their story.
Right. Yeah. So I think the answer in my mind is be respectful of the issues you address. My objection is to adolescent, juvenile, colossal boobs, and to that kind of mentality that trivializes or exploits or otherwise it fails to be respectful of its subject matter. And so it's really just a question of, if you're going to be mature, then be actually, in fact, mature. That's my approach.
I think one of the best games that I've seen do that was Heavy Rain, because there was really deep, dark, crazy stuff in there.
Yeah,
and it was like, whoa,
Yeah,
but it handled it in a way that was
right. But nobody came out and said this is pandering to yes.
Yeah, actually, in regards to that, when I'm thinking of adolescent immaturity, I think about fighting games where the women are in just bikinis and high heels.
Yeah.
No woman in their life will ever be in a fighting game.
Oh no. Well, Dead or Alive beach volleyball. They actually advertise their breast jiggle physics. Come on, guys, please.
Actually, it's funny when the only thing in the game is the breast that jiggle. Everything else never moves. The hair never moves. The plants don't move, but the breast jiggle.
That suggests that there's some poor programming in there.
That's funny.
Yeah, there's a whole other huge discussion, about sexism in our products, sexism in the industry, and marginalization of various people. We have 2 or maybe 3 black African American characters in video games, lead characters, main characters. There's lots of sidekicks. There's lots of and he's going to come with you and be your wingman. But there are relatively few main ones, and I'm not going to argue for political correctness. I'm not going to argue for quotas or anything like that. I'm just saying, come on, guys, let's try to vaguely reflect the people around us. Try to at least, if you're going to make a game about America, make it look a little bit like America. Instead of like the way we thought America was in 1955. Variety. It adds spice to your games. It makes them interesting. It makes them different. it's good. It's good for games. I guess we'll call that done.
Yep.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you again.